The illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine.
Hey, Church Planter, this is Pete.
And this is Peyton Jones.
And we're here for our third installment of the Don Stoner Show.
Woo! Don Stoner, the best kind of stoner there is. Woo! That was your theme song. It doesn't get much better than that, Don.
The family name was Steiner. And when we immigrated to the United States in the early 1700s, we changed it to Stoner so we'd blend right in and wouldn't stand out. That worked until about 1968.
I was going to say, we would have gotten away with it, too, if it weren't for those meddling kids back in the 60s.
I was just going to say, now that he lives in California, he does fit in as a stoner.
Yes,
I went to college in the 60s.
Yeah.
You must have
been very popular. Did I hear any stoner jokes during that time?
Did you? And not only that, you were a crazy scientist. Like, you could have actually been the Walter White of the 60s. You're like, oh, drugs? I could make you those.
Did we ask him our question that we always ask?
By the way, kids, stay in school. Don't do drugs. This podcast does not in any way endorse the use of narcotics or illegal drugs or substances.
Unless prescribed by a doctor.
Aspirin.
You do take aspirin?
I didn't take aspirin during the 60s. I was trying real hard to stay away from drugs.
Yeah, good for you, man.
Did we ask you? I don't remember. And it could just be because I'm turning into Peyton. My memory's going. One of our questions that we always ask our guests, and I can't remember if we asked it to him. Did we? The very first question we always ask? Do you remember, Peyton?
How he got saved?
Yeah. Did we ask him that?
Did we ask you that, Don? I don't think.
I don't know which question you're supposed to have.
How did you
come to faith?
Yeah, tell us your story of how you came to faith.
Oh, well, my parents were Christians, and I was a good little boy and went to church every day. And I was sitting in the primary department on a little green chair about 6 inches off the ground. And
were you still a kid, or were you full-grown adult sitting on that chair?
I was 6 years old, maybe. Okay. I'm not really sure. I might have been 7. I think I'll give it 6, but I'm not certain. I was singing the song, "Come Into My Heart, Lord Jesus," and I thought it would be cool if I sang it and meant it. And I thought I was the only person on the planet that knew if you sang that song meaning it, Jesus would indeed come into your heart. I tried it, and he did, and I thought, gee, that was really strange. I didn't know what had just happened, and it took me a long time to figure it out. I have friends that had stranger experiences getting saved. One of them got saved at a seance.
Wow.
Yeah, same church, actually. He's next door. The house next to that church became a commune, and he was a hippie living at that commune. And there was a fellow that I met at the church many years later after I'd figured out what Christianity meant. It was kind of crazy. He was an ex-hippie that had recently converted, and the guys at the commune decide to have a seance, and the demons come and drive them out of the house. So they say, well, let's try our seance in the backyard. So they try to call the demons again, and I don't know what they're thinking. They're probably loaded, obviously. So this friend everyone called Nick the Greek comes up to them and says, hey guys, what are you doing? And they explained they were having a seance, and the demons had driven them out of the house. And he said, oh, I know what you did wrong. You're calling down bad spirits. Here, let me help you. And he takes, oh dear, I have to figure out how to turn the stone phone off. There we go. That's you calling me, apparently. I don't, my phone is strange.
There's a little delay on your phone because I think I called you an hour and a half ago.
Oh, that's interesting.
But okay, since we're talking metaphysics, quantum science, quantum physics, let's just roll with it.
So Nick says, here, let me lead the seance for you. He has them all form a circle and they join hands. And he says, we're going to call down a good spirit. Everyone bow your heads. Jesus, come into our hearts right now. And he leads them in the sinner's prayer.
That's rad.
And everyone in that circle had a weird change in their life after that.
Wow.
Because they were opening to admitting spirits into their lives. And the fellow led them all in the sinner's prayer at this seance. So this friend of mine, Tommy Acevedo, is one of those loaded teenagers in the circle. And he knows something's happened to him, but he doesn't know what. He had the same kind of start I did.
That's amazing.
But
that's cool. That's really cool.
Still a friend to this day.
I love the fact that the way that God brought you to Christ, Don, was just through the very humble simplicity of being a child. Because as your brain grew, as a young Don Stoner, I feel like this is like I'm Stanley. As young Don Stoner's brain began to develop, reader, it's your origin story. Like we're going to talk about how you became like a super brain. And this is by way of introduction.
I don't think that ever happened, honestly. Well, I learned how to trick people along the way, I think.
There have been many an uncomfortable silence where you will bust something out that is so above my pay grade, mentally and intellectually, that I'm like, okay.
Let me explain it to you.
There will be a stunned silence here and I'll laugh. But here's the thing. You're very accessible. You're a friend to us. You've been a church planning partner with us. We felt, I'll never forget doing that open mic night, at Portello where you were kind of like the big guns. You were the artillery in the back. When I do meetings like that, whether it was in Wales or in the States, I always tend to have somebody who's like an expert, on a particular subject. And we just kind of keep you in the back. Like the Philistines had Goliath, we had you. And
you gave me a heads up, and I spent half an hour on the internet reading about it first.
But the thing is that where what we're doing today, guys. If you haven't joined us for the last few weeks, so we have Don Stoner. He is a scientist. He is a believer, and we've been talking over the last few weeks. I highly suggest that you go back and listen. We never know where Don's going with this stuff, but we told him we're going to give you 3 weeks.
We're almost kind of sure that Don doesn't know where he's going with this stuff too.
That
Pretty
would be
much
correct.
Pretty much, but it's been great. And so what we said was, look, we want you to talk about, all the things that are kind of fascinating that you can interact with, not only intelligent non-believers with, but even like you swim with sharks and you're in regular groups talking to scientists at a very high level. You're open about your faith. You're bold in what you share. You're also not foolish in what and how you share. And I think one of the gifts that you've been to the church is helping people understand that you don't have to check your brain to be a believer, committed to Scripture, committed to faith, committed to even the creation of the world, which often comes under fire. And so you wrote a book called A New Look at an Old Earth. And it is a fantastic book. I highly recommend that you get it. It actually is the book that changed my view on Young Earth, Old Earth. And because it was thoroughly biblical, it was thoroughly well researched, it was reasonable. But that's who we got on the show today. And if you like compact discs and ever use them, you should thank Don, because he had a part in inventing those. So so welcome, Don.
Well, thank you. What do you want to do?
I want to ask you a question of, since you grew up as a Christian and in the church, I'm sure your church, I'm not sure, but I would assume that your church growing up was very much like the common church today, in that, the earth is young and man was just created a few thousand years ago. And
that hadn't happened yet. I was raised at an American Baptist church.
Okay.
Which was fairly traditional. It wasn't until Whitcomb and Morris came out with the Genesis flood that the young earth teaching started catching on. Back before then, pretty much all Christians believed some form of evolution and that the earth was old. this is a new fad, the young earth thing. It actually was started by the visions of Ellen G. White in about the same time Charles Darwin was writing, 18.
So Ellen G. White, for those of you that don't
founders
know,
of the
was
Seventh-day
Christian.
Adventists.
Yeah.
Or at least effectively the founder, whether officially or not. There's some disagreement. But she had visions as a young girl, and one of her visions was that the days were literal, ordinary 24-hour days instead of what the whole church believed back then. The whole old earth thing was actually taught universally. It was come up with, thought up, conceived by a scientist who was a Christian named Hutton, who, studying the geological record, had determined that the earth was old, and all Christians said, sure, I don't have any trouble with that. There are different ways of understanding Genesis to accommodate that. But Ellen G. White had a vision in which God presumably, ostensibly, told her that the days were ordinary and that she had to worship on the Seventh-day Adventist, ergo, that to keep the pattern. That's why it was so important that these be literal days instead of longer days. Otherwise, there's no reason to worship on the seventh day. And she wrote it in a collection of her visions. And she later wrote about Noah's flood and had some crazy ideas about that. And excuse me for calling them crazy, but she had a geometrically perfect earth, meaning completely ugly, in my opinion. Mountains that were all shaped like perfect cones and things like that, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I read this. And she described it as being beautiful, and then the flood supposedly messed it all up and made it look like how it is today. You know, created things like Yosemite Valley and other ugly Mars on the surface of the earth. None of the Seventh-day Adventists at the time had any trouble with this until a young kid named George McCready Price came along, and he'd had a few science classes, and he realized he had some problems with trying to make her visions concur with science. So he did some studying, and what he did was sat down and wrote the new geology. He basically rewrote all of geology in a nice gray textbook about, 2.25 inches thick, which I did read. And it was essentially Whitcomb and Morris's book, the Genesis flood. They borrowed a lot of his ideas anyway to make their book. They took some of his arguments and put footnotes on them to make them look more scientific than Price's just retelling of the story with his ideas about how to make it fit White's visions. But it was essentially the same thing repackaged. And now I'm wondering if it was The Waters Above or if that was Whitcomb's book, and I don't have either of the books with me right now, so I can't check. But it was either the Genesis flood, or if I'm wrong about that, it would have been The Waters Above. Earlier book by at least Whitcomb, if not Whitcomb and Morris. So it got repackaged in something that looks scientific, and at that point, the church started catching on to it. The fundamentalists first, and later a lot of other churches. But that was later in the 60s, maybe 1968, by the time it hit the Calvary Chapel circuit. And Chuck had Gish and Morris and some of the guys come out and present it. And after that, it pretty much became canonized, and I was completely horrified by it. And it took me a few years to get my act together and write my own book. It was, I might have been about a decade, a couple decades. I was a full score of years late responding to the crisis. I didn't have my act together well enough to write a textbook or get anyone to let me teach it or anything until 2 decades later. So
I didn't realize it was such a new thing.
Yeah, they teach that it was taught by all the apostolic fathers. In my book, at least the new edition of it, chapter 6, I believe, I added a chapter from the old edition about Noah's flood and the origins of the young earth teaching, and went through all the apostolic fathers and showed why they did not teach what the young earthers claimed they taught. Josephus, for example, says that he understands why the word day was used in Genesis chapter 1, and says that he's ready to write about it, but since he's planning on giving a treatise on it, he'll get back to it later, is how he presents it. He never got back to it. So we never got to find out what he would have said. But if anyone tells you Josephus wrote about it, that's an incorrect statement of what Josephus said. It's a simple error. Thomas Aquinas, I think he believed the days were all 1,000 years long. Origen thought they were very long, indefinite periods of time, proves it from his understanding of Hebrews chapter 4. Oh, who else was there? Augustine spiritualized them. He thought that because there was an evening and morning before the sun and moon were created, they couldn't be literal days at all.
Right.
There are all kinds of views. I couldn't find anyone who said there were 24-hour days, but it wouldn't surprise me if one of the ancients did. It's just that all the ones the young earthers quote didn't happen to say that. And now I've lost my train of thought, of course.
What I find interesting is probably the thing that we had the biggest pushback on from our last podcast episode was the flood.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's, again, it's like touching the third rail in the Protestant community.
There's plenty of evidence on it.
Well, yeah, but they're not concerned about evidence because they're just, this is what my English translation of the Bible said. But it was funny because I'd already read an article by an apologist who used the Bible to disprove the whole earth flood theory as opposed to a regional flood. So I was already open and exposed to that concept. And I was trying to find that article. I couldn't find it, but I found another one by a guy over at Stands to Reason. And he goes, you got to realize that more is written about the Genesis flood in the rest of the Bible than was written in Genesis. So you really have to read everything. And he was pointing out verses in, Peter, where he's basically saying this was a regional thing. And that was what they all understood it as. But it was interesting to see the pushback that we got from our listeners, which, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at the slightest, right?
It's in Josephus, too. You can read about the flood as a regional flood in Flavius Josephus.
No kidding.
Retelling. But according to tradition, Josephus had a deal with Titus that when he took Jerusalem, Josephus would get the temple scrolls. Now, whether or not he was able to salvage them from the fire, of course, is a sticky question, and I wouldn't be able to come down either way on that. Josephus never said, I received the temple scrolls. But he did say a lot of stuff that is not considered biblical. He has lots of detail that sounds like biblical detail that we do not find anywhere in our biblical writings, suggesting he had another source. Some speculate that somehow he did receive the scrolls. I don't have an answer for that.
Interesting.
So I guess, kind of an interesting place to go is when people say, like you brought up the age of the earth. This is really your field of expertise, but that can be a sticking point because I get where people, and I was there for a long time, where to me, I was like, look, everything's open to interpretation. My interpretation is faulty, but I know the scripture is not. And so I wasn't sure if science was being interpreted wrong or if the Bible was being interpreted wrong. That was my mindset at the time. Who's interpreting what wrong? Because human beings,
both.
And that's what I was going to say is, I mean, if we're even right now in the present time with our vaccines and that whole debate raging, I'll listen to both sides. And I'm like, you're both getting stuff wrong about that. Right. I come from the medical field and I'm like, you're both getting things wrong about vaccines.
Back in the dark ages, when I went to college, it was taught that science was never settled. That changed when global warming was being pushed. All of a sudden, science was settled for the first time ever. And my thought was, what? I've never heard the science was settled. I pulled out my old textbooks, and sure enough, it wasn't settled, never will be.
Right.
But when I started to suggest that maybe global warming might be wrong, I was censored.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, when you're looking at medical, I'll never forget, like years ago, realizing that Chinese medicine, Asian medicine, that's every bit as good as our medicine, as Western medicine, has a completely different premise, is based on a completely different criteria for health, which is based around your central nervous system, right?
As
Western
I explained
medicine,
last week, I'm not the expert when it comes to cutting you up and editing you, so I'm not going to make a statement.
Western medicine is completely based around your circulatory system. So the West focuses on the circulatory system. The East focuses on the central nervous system. So that's why all the the pressure points, it's all about getting the right amount of nerve stimulation to your organs rather than circulation. We don't really talk about that. So whenever we call something science, whenever we call it, hey, doctors say, yeah, but remember, only 4 out of 5 doctors recommend Crest. Like, doctors have
how many doctors
opinions.
Did you ask?
Doctors
5.
come. Okay, so
next time ask Dennis.
If you go to an osteopathic doctor in this country, as opposed to just a regular medically trained doctor, they operate from a completely different set of understanding how the body works. So you don't, it's like psychology. Well, psychologists say, which school of thought are they from? Do they believe Anderson? Are they Freudian? Are they Jung? Who do they follow? Like, okay, that's great. They're psychiatrists. It doesn't mean they know everything. It means they were trained in a certain way. They have a certain amount of opinions that shape how they interpret the data. But the same with the Bible, right? We all come to the Bible. Look, there's a reason there's a million denominations, because someone came to baptism and said, this is the way it is. And someone said, nuh-uh. Someone came to communion. Someone came to church membership. Someone came to church leadership. Someone came to, we have the basics of the faith, the fundamentals, as it were. But there are many, many, many different interpretations of certain passages. Egalitarian, Calvinism versus Arminianism. Now, interpretation is suspect. That's what I'm saying. So going back to that, in my day, it was, well, I don't know which of these I'm interpreting wrong. And I love that you said both, because I'm pretty sure that's definitely the case. So
some of the time each gets part of it right. Most of the time there are mistakes in both sides of any argument.
So how do people navigate through that? Because I know our theme has been, we've actually been talking about the issues themselves rather than how to talk to skeptics and, people who are into science, which I think we can even put that off. I'd like to go more into this. How do you navigate through the both of these, interpreting the Bible and interpreting science? What are kind of like the touch points for people as they're navigating through this, the things they can hold on to and that will navigate them? Because I think even on the origin of the earth, like how it was done, I think you and I even have slightly different, mine's wrong, obviously, but slightly different views. Like I love playing around with ideas. You and I have talked a lot about quantum physics, what I can understand of quantum physics. So you keep it low level, but we've talked, and I'm like, I think quantum physics is the stuff that angels and the supernatural works on. I think that's a whole nother thing. I think they have a set of rules they operate by. I think we're starting to discover that. But at the same time, when it comes to the age of the earth, I think it's old. And those days of creation, I wonder, like, could these be literal days on the calendar that were not consecutive, but are punctuated equilibrium, that some of the data, in origins and science, and cosmogony, that these things seem like all of a sudden you just had an explosion of a certain type of life, or you had a.
Don's winding up. I mean,
I know he's looking for something. I'm getting excited.
This particular book presents a theory that they're literal days, but they're days of presentation.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like something like punctuated equilibrium, where God created, and then millions of years later, he goes, right, now we're going to, he gives the plants time to, flourish. They develop, and I'm not even against evolution.
This is a different theory. In this book,
I'm not a macro evolutionist at all. And I don't know where you stand on that. I think you might
explain, but I wanted to.
I want to hear all that. Yeah.
Explain this silly thing first.
Go on.
This fellow doesn't say the days are separated by gaps. He says that there were 7 consecutive days, but they were days of revelation, meaning that first God created the universe, which took the amount of time that you can read into it by using the scientific evidence, or you can pick anything you want for whatever reason. And then at some point, God now has to tell Adam what he did, because Adam, of course, doesn't come along till the 6th day, however the days are to be interpreted. So he's got to have it explained. And according to the theory, God sits down and tells Adam about one thing every day for another week. Different kind of week if you're older, same kind of week if you're younger. Now, this fellow, P.J. Wiseman, who wrote the book, takes the position that the creation days were a long period of time, but the revelation days were 24 hours and consecutive. It's just another way of doing it. The gaps between the individual days work too, except that it appears that the events happened over a period of time, even within each day, and even had overlapping edges. So that is a little bit non-scientific.
Okay, so here's one thing that people will sometimes say. The opening chapters of Genesis are written in poetic form, almost in a formula of a way of
almost certainly true that they are poetic, in addition to being true.
So for the purpose of having something that's more formulaic in presentation than meant to be, you were meant to dissect every jot and tittle out of this to get a scientific understanding. It's the basics. God created this, and there's certain components, each according to its kind, right? And God saw it was good. And he said, let them, there's this flourishing, multiplying. There's these themes that are recurring. Things are filling, things are multiplying, things are doing what they're created to do. Because when you get into biblical theology, there's they really dissect the Bible as literature. And I think that's really helpful. What was the intention of the author? Was the intention of the author to give you a sign, or was the intention of the author something more theological? And that with the way it's formulated, it's more important that you understand what creation was meant to do. And so the way it's presented is, let them bear according to their kind, which by the time we get up to mankind is meant to produce according to its kind. He's meant to fill the earth and glorify God by doing that, by creating more images of God in this world that God's created. But instead of producing according to their kind, man produces sin. And unfortunately, once man produces sin, man does begin to multiply and fill the earth, but he fills the earth with sinners. And so as you follow Genesis's narrative, he is producing according to his kind, like all the rest of creation, but that's a problem, right? And so when you go back, is there something more theological that we're meant to be understanding from Genesis rather than this is a science text?
If we rewind it all the way to the first chapter and not worry about the rest of theology getting developed over the X number of millennia, we're going back 5,300 years to when Genesis was originally written. It's do I have that right, or is it 5,100? I can't fix
It
it.
wasn't
right now.
yesterday. That's
What's
the
100 years here and
It was
there?
over 5,000 years ago, give or take.
Yeah.
A few hundred years. And you can nail it down, but I just am not going to be able to do it right now. Everyone's speaking.
Come on, Don, come
Sumerian.
prepared, man.
Yeah, sorry.
Just joking.
Everyone's
Don's
speaking
forgetting more than I'll
Sumerian.
ever
They
know.
write in pictoglyphs. They do not write in textual. It's ideograms rather than, or ideograms, I guess is how that's supposed to be pronounced. But ideograms is much easier to understand than ideograms. They're writing with these little pictures, and you get one word per picture. And they're speaking ancient Sumerian, and they're thinking ancient Sumerian. The text can go a lot of different directions, and a lot's been read into that text that was never in there to begin with. It's a much simpler document than I pretended it was when I wrote my book, because at the time I didn't know Sumerian. I'm afraid I'm guilty of not understanding what I was writing about as far as the text went. I got my information on it from theological books. I'm not sure that at the time I was first studying it that Sumerian had been cracked yet. I don't really know, and I could figure it out, but I don't have time to right now to do the research, so I won't figure out whether or not the Sumerian language had been cracked when I originally studied it. But it happened at least soon after then, if not soon before. So if I had written the book now, A New Look at an Old Earth, I would have probably had it twice as long and had half of it being understanding Sumerian, which would have meant nobody would have read it instead of the 3 people that actually did.
Pete,
I got nothing.
I talked way too much already, so I got to hold back on that.
He went well over my head. No, so here's.
He lost you at
It's
Sumerian.
a real simple text.
I don't know if we should go down this path or not.
God created sky and earth, day 1. God separated sky
I want to
from
ask
earth,
you.
day
I want to
2.
ask you the question that will offend 98% of our listeners. I think it's time that we, offend them all with this question, with the answer, I think, to this question.
I know where you're going, Pete. Why do you always have to break things? Yes.
I don't think
talk. All right.
Well,
all right.
maybe.
I'll tell you yes or no. I'll blink twice if you're doing it.
I want to know your thoughts on evolution as opposed to instant creation.
I am a tongue-in-cheek punctuated equilibriist. Do you know who Stephen Gould and Richard Dawkins are?
Yes.
Did you know about their famous debate and the fact that the 2 of them got together? Dawkins, of course, understood evolutionary dynamics, which, oh dear, I've misplaced my book. I had evolutionary dynamics here, and now I don't. That's interesting. Oh,
now, is this your daughter's house that you're at?
I'm sorry.
Is this your daughter's house that you're at?
Yes, it is.
And do you just keep a spare library at your daughter's house?
I do. As a matter of fact, Introduction to Population Genetics. You can explain.
Oh, I get that copy too. Mine's not as dog-eared as yours, but
Yeah. The deal is, it's all mathematical. You can derive the mechanics of evolution. You can test the mathematics in the lab with bacteria and grasshoppers or mice or whatever you're playing with, and the rules all work. And it says it has to happen gradually. This is where Richard Dawkins is coming from. He understands the mathematics explained in this book, and it says it's got to be gradual or it didn't happen. Darwin himself understood that, and he said there's a problem. The fossil record says otherwise, but the fossil record is imperfect. So what? When we figure it all out, we'll see that it's gradual. Only problem is along came more paleontologists, and a lot of time spent digging Africa in particular, and they managed to fill in all the gaps, and by golly, the gaps were real. They happened at discrete times and very quickly. which violated everything that the evolutionists, meaning the people who studied population genetics, the mathematics of it, knew had to be true. So here's this crazy guy, Stephen Gould, who's a digger, like Alan Grant in the Jurassic Park series. He's coming from a different place. He doesn't care about the mathematics. He cares about the evidence, the hard, cold evidence that he's pulling out of the ground. And guys like Leakey and Gould, there were two Leakeys, dad and son, Richard and Louis, they were all GAPAs or jumpus, but punctuation is what they call it, punctuated equilibrius. It stays the same for millions of years, and all of a sudden a new species appears. Why did they say such a crazy thing? It absolutely violates the mathematics and the science of evolution, and the answer is because that's what the fossil record says. So I'm a tongue-in-cheek punctuated equilibrius. They say evolution changes quickly when you don't have a large population. You get a small isolated population and it can evolve very quickly, is their argument. Now, anyone who's studied population dynamics, or did I get that right? Population genetics, will tell you that that's absurd. If you have a small population, it cannot evolve quickly.
Because it would die out, right?
Well, that's what usually happens. They had some California condors at the San Diego Zoo many years ago. They had 5 of them. What's going to happen to the condors? So what they used to say is they're going to die. There's not enough of them to maintain the population, that genetic mutations will swamp them. Instead, what happened is a bunch of biologists got in there and hand-fed the little babies and made them all survive until they had a large enough population that evolution could work again. And they eventually were able to turn them loose back into a non-captivity environment. So they succeeded, but it took intelligent intervention to make it happen. The population was too small. Now, anyone who studied population genetics knows that. And the reason I keep confusing it with evolutionary dynamics is that's this book here that has chapter 3 where it explains I don't know if I can find it.
And you said no authors, Pete. No authors. No book interviews.
Those aren't his books. Those aren't his books.
Are these Karen's books? Is that what I'm talking?
No, it's a joke between me and Pete. I told him I won't do a podcast when we're interviewing an author.
I told him recently, we got to get Philip Yancey. I know I can get him back on. We got it for old time's sake because we made him really mad, and I know he'll come on. And Pete's like, nope, no authors. That violates the no authors. And By the way, I was in the car with my daughter when I'm having this conversation with Pete. And when I hang up, my daughter looks at me and goes, Pete does know you're an author, right? So anyways.
And don't I hate those interviews where I got to interview you on your book?
It shows. All right, let's go. Don, back to you.
Okay. Those are a couple of really good books on the subject. And what they do is take opposite positions. One of them supports Richard Dawkins, the other supports Stephen Gould. And they both refute the other one. I was going to give you a short argument for why population genetics refutes quick change. And that's, you put 2 targets on the wall. One's a little target, the other one's a big target. You blindfold yourself, go back far enough that you can barely hit the wall at all, and you throw 1 billion darts at it. Which target catches the most darts? And the answer is the big one does. Now, favorable mutations are fairly rare. If you have a large population, you're going to get a few on the big target. If the little target is little enough, you won't get one blasted mutation on it. If you'll excuse me talking about COVID goes to India and finds a nice big population, and very quickly you have 1 million cases there. I don't know what the number actually was, but I think that's at least the right ballpark. Or maybe it's tens of millions. I don't really know. And you got a large enough population. Every person that gets sick has quite a few viruses in their lungs. It's not just one. And so you probably have billions of viruses. And can a mutation occur in that large a population over that long period of time that India was getting affected? And the answer is yes. there are two particular mutations. I think there were 7 total in the Delta mutation that made it different. But there are 2 of them that were on, in the S gene, the section that binds to the lung, the spike protein. There is a motif and something larger called I can't remember. The motif is a very short little section of amino acids, which has the little suction cups that hook onto the lungs. And there were 2 of them in that. 2 of the mutations occurred in that. And it was enough that it's able to hang onto the lungs a little more tightly than before. And it took a lot of critters to come up with that very small modification. What you see in the fossil record is not that many individuals. You see very small populations that suddenly change. They don't change over a long period of time, and they don't change upward at a gradual rate. They suddenly have the new characteristic. And if are you going to let me go off onto some very controversial stuff?
Come on. Hey, that's why.
Well, let me pause you right there.
I was about to ask you more controversial questions.
Here's the takeaway from what you just said right there. You're basically saying, hey, like the California condor, it can only happen with intelligent intervention.
Yeah, that's right. And if you get a large enough population for a long enough period of time,
theistic evolution?
You can get little tiny steps. Okay.
I see what you're doing, Mitchell. He's trying to settle on the old debate that we have regarding you.
I said you were a theistic evolutionist.
Listen, there's a wait. Before you answer, let me set this up. On Saving Private Ryan, one of my favorite movies of all time, they have this pool going about what the commander, what the captain did before the war. Turns out, if you've not seen it, don't listen. But spoiler alert, he's a school teacher. And so there's this poll going around. So that's what's happened with you over like probably the last 6 months. You keep popping up, or maybe 3 months since we started talking about getting you on. And we keep having this debate. And I'm like, I don't think he does, but anyways, go on.
I'm not sure if I should reply to that or not.
Yeah, come on, settle the score between us.
Okay, what is it? What's the question? I missed the question.
I say you're a theistic evolutionist, meaning you believe in evolution, but it has to take God to actually move the pieces forward.
I don't like the term theistic evolution, but you're not too far off the mark. I'm not.
I'm going to take that as a win.
You are a heretic.
I'm going to take that as a win.
No, I'm teasing. I don't think that's heresy.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to. That's what we want to hear. Is we want to hear kind of where you've navigated.
The next heretical thing to a theistic evolutionist. I can answer by evolutionary arguments anything that an evolutionist can argue, and I can answer by my one adjustment which is I call the surrogate mother theory, incidentally, which I can explain if I haven't already. I don't remember whether
no, you haven't.
Okay, well, I'll do that after I'm through answering this question. I can explain using that all the things that the evolutionists can't answer. So what I have done is come up with something that's almost theistic evolution that explains everything, but it requires the one adjustment. Here's the one adjustment. It's on the internet. It's called the surrogate mother theory, which is a horrible name for it. And you can get it from my webpage, link it, or you can search on surrogate mother theory and get it straight.
I've heard this before from him.
Okay. The random mutations, fittest survive would be Darwin's theory in a nutshell. That explains everything Darwin's going to say. For the surrogate mother theory, it's God uses surrogate mothers. Okay? If you're a genetic engineer at MIT or Caltech or wherever else you might be messing around with genes, you don't sit down and take dirt and build your new critter. What you do is you take some DNA and you make some modifications to it. And maybe you take pieces from 2 different kinds of animals. If you're building a chimera, the mythical being like a harpy that's part one animal, part another animal. You take the DNA, you edit it together, and then you have to come up with a mommy to implant it in to have it grow. And I'm sloppily calling that a surrogate mother, since it's a little more extreme than a surrogate mother would be. Now you pull out your Bible. This is going to become biblical. Sorry about that. I didn't intend to become a theologian. And open it to the book of Luke. See if I
Oh,
can
is he
find
cracking
out
the Bible open?
Yeah.
I didn't know heretics did that.
And where am I going? I'm
Hey,
going to Luke.
I just want to say I called it when I first met him.
A heretic?
Yeah. Well, I'm about to really become a heretic too. This is, of all my heresies, this is the least favorite of them.
But you know, this is the thing, Don, is you're probably the guy that believes the Bible more than almost anyone I've ever met. So it's not, it's just, like I said, it's not the Bible that's ever suspect with you. It's our interpretation.
Right.
I think that's important. It's an important, so I trust you, man.
I thought one of the biggest takeaways from the last episode we did was, what was the author's intent? Yeah. Not what is our translation, but what was the author's actual intent when they wrote this?
In this case, it's what did the author actually say that we read over and over again and we don't even see the words because it's so plain that it's there in any translation you try to read it in. Okay, you're Mary. You've just been interrupted very rudely by someone who tells you you're pregnant, right? That which is conceived of you is?
Born of the Holy Spirit.
God overshadowed you, Mary. Yeah. And you, because of that, the thing that's going to be born will be called the Son of God. Okay, this is Luke chapter 1, and I found where it was, but I also remembered I didn't bring my reading glasses, so I can't read the blasted thing. So
tell me what verse I can read it.
I have to tell you what it says from memory, and I just did. And you can look at it yourself and find the actual verses because the numbers are too small for me to see in my Bible. But in any case, we all know the passage. You're going to call this thing the Son of God, that which is you've conceived and will give birth to. Oh, you've got your reading glasses here. Here's my Bible. See if you can read it.
Pete does that when he wants to seem really smart. And then when he's negotiating,
did you see how much smarter he got? That was cool.
When you offer,
Okay. So now we know to watch out for things called the Son of God, right?
I need my glasses to show that when we talk with Don Stoner, all boats rise, all boats are lifted up.
Now we flip a couple chapters ahead and we get to one of the most boring chapters in the whole Bible, unless you count the first 10 chapters of Chronicles or something. So-and-so begat so-and-so who begat or no, it was the son of, in this case, they didn't begat, we're going backwards. So-and-so was the son of so-and-so. And we're starting with basically Jesus genealogies, and we're taking it back all the way to Adam, who was the son of. God. What does it say?
Yeah. Son of God, yeah.
That's right. Why was Jesus called the Son of God?
Because he was conceived of the Holy Spirit. He was created directly by God.
He was created directly. How was he birthed?
By Mary.
By Mary. This is what is called the Son of God. We receive a definition of sorts. Now, we're not using pure logic here. We're using linguistics instead of logic. We're saying we've defined a word and we see that, or a phrase, and we're seeing the phrase used again. Yeah. If you construct a syllogism, this is an invalid syllogism because we don't have enough to nail it down. But
Pete, remember we were talking about invalid syllogisms, and we were saying how down we get about those?
I get $2. I won the bet.
Good for you.
$2. Now you just got to leave me messages.
Just because
sorry, Don.
If something is called the Son of God, that doesn't mean everything you call the Son of God suddenly becomes conceived of a virgin or something like that. But we do have a linguistic link to what the Son of God means. And Adam is being called the Son of God. And we've got a clue here that suggests he was born of a virgin, something else that wasn't quite exactly human. Now, is this possibly how God did his creating? In which case, the steps would all have to be small. Little things like bad RH factors, RH positive, RH negative. Now, this is your field.
So let me ask you, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. What you're saying is, over time, God was in the same way he intervenes in the Gospel of Luke, you're saying he's intervened. That's kind of the argument here. Intervened.
That is what I am suggesting.
Okay. All right.
What would that predict if that were God's mechanism for creating? We have this clue here that we've never seen. There are a lot of things that it predicts. For example, how was Eve made? God takes something out of Adam's side. And he calls his wife T, which is the Sumerian word for side or rib.
Is it actually a rib, or is that an open to translation? Because I think it might have been his appendix, first appendicitis.
The word T, and the only reason I'm saying T is because there's a pun in Sumerian in Genesis.
Wow.
Chapters 2 and chapter 3. Adam names his wife two different things for two different reasons. Adam called his wife woman because she was taken from his side.
Right.
Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living in chapter 3. Okay, what's going on? Why does he give her two different names? Why are they different? And the answer is, in Sumerian, they're the same word.
Oh.
The word is T. It's a Sumerian pun. It means many different things. It means shaft, arrow, flight, life in Sumerian. If it could be a rib. If Adam names his wife T because she was taken from his side, that suggests a rib.
Okay, but does it also suggest this is why men's two favorite things are women and ribs? Because
do I have to answer that?
No, sorry. Keep going.
I'm with women. Forget ribs.
I actually am with Don on that one.
Did I ever tell you I'm married a prom court nominee? And I went into shock. He said yes. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't yes.
That's great.
You've seen Aladdin propose to Princess Jasmine, I suspect.
I have.
So this little girl has hair going down to her behind. Absolutely gorgeous little girl with kind of Asian-looking eyes a little bit.
Debbie, yeah.
Debbie has little Asian-looking eyes, and she had hair going down to her behind when I asked her. And what Jasmine did, instead of saying yes, was she shook her head and sent waves down her hair. Debbie did that.
Oh.
And I can imagine Aladdin going into shock. Because I know what clinical shock feels like when it happens.
Great. Yes. When I woke up, she was, Don, are you okay? Slapping my face. Don, are you okay?
Something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Turns out she went into shock too. She'd only.
She's been in shock ever since she said yes.
I put her into shock every week or so. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to remember where we were. I'm telling about Adam and Eve here. And we've got a pun. We've got the rib.
Yeah, the Sumerian pun.
It's
yeah,
definitely going to be a rib. He names his wife Life, which is from arrow to flight, and then to life, because she would become the mother of all the living. So he named his wife T because she was from his side, and she would become the mother of all the living. It's a double pun. Or it goes two different directions, so it becomes a pun when it goes two different directions.
Okay.
An untranslatable pun. Okay, let's say God takes a rib. How's he going to make a woman out of a rib? Well, there's DNA in the dumb thing, right? So it doesn't have to be a very big piece. It doesn't have to be a whole rib. It just has to be a piece of it. Enough that he can get some chromosomes. Adam has an X and a Y chromosome and everything else to make a whole human. You grab the X chromosomes and you throw away the Y. You stick them together like a genetic engineer could do easily. You stuff it into a surrogate mother.
I've never thought about it from that perspective. That's amazing.
And now you have to wait a while, don't you? How long are we going to wait?
Adam gave birth
himself.
Pete, everything's come full circle. We're back to this. I feel like Loki. Like now that we're in the sacred timeline again.
I just rewatched that movie. He's talking about a movie called Predestination starring Ethan Hawke. And the guy, it's a time traveler. He ends up marrying himself and giving birth to himself. And I'm like, this is the greatest movie ever.
It's a time travel movie.
Okay, it's not what God did.
Sorry.
You have to listen, pay attention. Okay. God uses surrogate mothers, not surrogate fathers for this.
Okay, I know. I'm only teasing.
Okay, how long are we going to wait? It depends on.
Well, the kid's got to grow up if you're birthing a kid.
Yeah. And so what does Adam, wait a second now. Didn't Adam wake up after his nap and say, wow, there's a woman next to me? Is that what happened?
Yeah. Yes, he did.
Why do you say that?
That's not the actual verbiage. Doesn't it say something like, at last you brought her to me or something like that?
There are a couple of verses.
Gosh dang it, Don, I walked into one of your traps again.
Because it violates our little story we've been told about.
Yeah, Genesis. It's true. You're right.
I pull my Bible out again and I can't read it. So what does it say? How do Adam
bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, at last you brought her to me or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something like that. But
here we go. I'm going to read it. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. The man
brought
said,
her to the man. Where was she that she needed bringing to the man? She was somewhere else. How many of us ever saw that? We've all been told he wakes up and there she is laying next to him.
Yeah.
That's not the truth, is it?
Yeah.
She was somewhere else. We never saw that because we didn't have the right theory. We were told a lie. And every time we've read our Bible, we haven't even seen the words that are right there in black and white on the page. The words say she was brought to the man.
You're right.
And then, of course, there's could it be translated at long last, the other verse you were speaking of. It's been a while.
I can promise you, if I had preached this Sunday, I would have literally preached it that Adam woke up with Eve next to him.
And next time you'll read your Bible first, right?
No.
Ooh. Anything?
No. No. I think we've settled that pretty much is not what happens when we're reading the Bible, right?
Yeah, we see what we think we're going to see.
Right.
Our preconceptions change what we see.
Right.
Now I run over my leash here and I'm pulling my headset off.
The good news is, Don, we don't have to end at 11. So if Debbie loans you to us a little bit longer, Pete and I can go a little bit longer.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Where are we going?
But real quick.
Finish the story.
Yeah.
Maybe we finished it.
Okay. All right.
So what happened?
Oh, punctuated equilibrium. Okay. Yeah. This is how I think God did all of his creatures. Every single one of them takes a female of a similar species, which is why you can genetically link the whole thing into what the cladis or the one form of evolution is called the tree of life, where you start with some protozoic thing, blue-green algae probably, and if you follow cytochrome C, which is kind of a slow mutating protein that's in the mitochondria that doesn't sexually combine with other things, stays pure. You can follow the sequence that God used in creating different species because he didn't bother changing the mitochondria. He left it back the same way as it was originally, and it leaves a footprint of the path he took, creating each new species. When the paleontologists like Gould was a paleontologist. He was more of a book guy than a field guy. Donald C. Johanson, the Leakey family, Mary and her husband and son. What they see is the step where God suddenly engineers something that's close enough to the other thing that a female of the earlier species can give birth to the new species, but different enough that you can tell you're dealing with something else, that you're not dealing with the same thing. And what that does is explains everything. When you have that theory, that you don't have to be afraid of any piece of evidence anywhere. Stephen Gould is not afraid of the fossils. He's afraid of population genetics, the mathematics. Richard Dawkins is not afraid of population genetics. He's afraid of the fossils. When those two got together and debated, Richard Dawkins says, we're never going to have this debate again. This is tearing down science. It's anti-scientific to actually discuss something, was sort of the way it is. I had an opportunity to debate, come on, let me make it the right one. Richard Dawkins one time. It was a complete accident. I was not scheduled to debate him. I was in a small lecture hall. He was giving a short, before the lecture. There might have been 20 college students in the lecture, and I heard about it, and I got there to sit in on it. When the question started, I asked Dr. Dawkins about punctuated equilibria, and he immediately asked me if I was a Christian and would refuse to answer the questions on the presupposition that I was a Christian, and you can't possibly argue with a Christian. And the reason is because my question involved Stephen Gould, and he doesn't want to debate Stephen Gould or anyone who's trained in Stephen Gould's theory, because he knows he will get nailed. And eventually he got to the point where he had painted himself into a corner where I was able to ask the question, Dr. Dawkins, regarding your theory that God is very complex, is that in principle falsifiable? At which point the whole lecture hall, a small lecture hall, 20 students, all started laughing, because he kind of shot himself in the foot at this point. And it was the wrong kind of victory. It was the victory where I won the battle and lost the war. Next time I encountered Richard Dawkins, he pretty much refused to talk to me, wouldn't answer, say, "Hey, I recognize you," when I put my hand up. And when he finally did, because mine was the only hand in the auditorium, I had laryngitis that day, and he pretended that I was confused rather than he couldn't hear me, and mocked me for asking the question, which I was unable to even voice at the time. But that was an example of playing it wrong and losing the war. Next time I talked to one of those guys, it was Donald Johansson, and he's my friend. I'll never have any trouble with him, but of course he was on my side of the same punctuated equilibrium issue. But where I'm going from this is the two sides will not debate, because each of them can refute the other person's evidence with what they know or the other person's theory for what they know for sure. What the paleontologists know for sure is that it happens in jumps. What the book and laboratory people know, the ones who are dealing with the experimental things where they're actually mutating them by various processes, know for sure is that the jumps don't happen. COVID is an example of a jump. It's a chimera. It's part pangolin and part bat. The spike protein is from a pangolin. The rest of the critter is from a bat. And there are all kinds of theories about how this happens in nature, but there's a third entity involved in it. There's what is called a furin marking point, or furin cleavage point, which is covered by U.S. patent 7223390. Should I give that to you again?
That's
you
the
literally
greatest.
just quoted this from memory.
We've never had a guest go, and this is patent number.
Okay. The reason I am telling you this is because anyone who's curious can look it up. It's on the internet. I'll give you the number.
It must
again.
be true then. It's on the internet.
Yeah, it's on the internet, right? It's a government posting of all the U.S. patents. You can get it all over the place. There are multiple copies of it, so you don't have to trust one. And you can actually pull the real patent if you want to see it. If you've all got your pens now, I'm going to give it to you again. 7223390. The inventor's name is Dennis T. Brown, and he also filed a refiling. Oh, and I can't remember that number, but it's something like 9121.
Get your act together, Don. Don't even come with misinformation. No fake news on this podcast. No fake news.
Come prepared, for Pete's sake, man.
I apologize. I'm not prepared. Okay, but there is a refiling. He files the same thing again, drops a few of the claims. Now, what's interesting is what he's patenting is this furin cleavage point. Patent claim one, there are things you claim when you're making a patent application, is edit this furin cleavage point into a virus that doesn't have it. Claim number two, use a sequence RRXR. or maybe, no, it was RXRR, and I'm sorry for getting that backward, but I did get it backward. I remember it was RXXR, and explains in the text that it could be a trivial variation. Of course, you could make it RRXR instead of RXRR, right? That would be trivial. And then he gives a couple other unique variations that sort of work in the claims 3 and 4. And then you go down to claim, oh dear, it's either 8 and 9 or 9 and 10. And I'm sorry, but 9 is one of them. And he claims
the reason we're laughing, Don, is Pete and I's conversation usually hovers somewhere around inventing new nicknames for him, like Peter Potato Head or things like that, which happened today.
Well, the reason I know about patents is I have 3 of them and wrote my first one and actually had to study them. But claim number 9 is either one of 2 claims in the one before it or the one after it. And I'm sorry, I can't remember. The 2 in order are the first one. A virus that is 100 times more infectious than without the furin cleavage point in there. And the other is a virus that is 1,000 times more infectious without the cleavage point. And you go to the coronavirus sequence, which you can also find on the internet. And it is an RR, which means one particular amino acid, RR, and the X can be anything, so it doesn't matter what it is. And I think it's an A in this case. And then there's another R that wasn't edited in that was already there in the bat DNA that's up against the first part of the sequence. It finishes off the RRAR. And it's from the first of 3 things he suggests, and it's backwards, which is a trivial variation of it. And so this thing gets edited in from the patent. And what a surprise, you end up something that's completely novel, that is so much more infectious than anything ever done before, that supposedly happened naturally, but it's a chimer of 3 things. Thing 1 is a piece of bat virus DNA, pangolin virus DNA. I think I might have just said bat and pangolin. It's not the critters, it's the viruses that infect them. Of course, it's a chimer of those 2. And the third thing, it doesn't come from any critter. It came from a patent.
Well, Don, we all know that coronavirus came because a penguin kissed a bat. So don't be trying to use this science hocus pocus on us.
Yeah. Well, I'm not trying to
I've
use
seen
science
Madagascar.
hocus
It could
pocus.
happen.
I'm just telling you things that you can check for yourself. You can download the pangolin virus sequence from the internet. You can download the bat sequence. You can compare the 2 in the early coronavirus and see all the mutations that have happened over the couple of years in the millions of cases that we've had, hundreds of millions of cases, actually. Probably won't, it might be a whole billion of them before we're actually done, or if we count undocumented cases. How much evolution has actually happened in the wild since then with all of these cases everywhere. And you see not nearly as much as when the thing first originated in this one hocus pocus thing. Now, what is more likely, that the 2 pieces of DNA mutated together somehow because of an accident of infection that happened with 2 simultaneous species that don't live within hundreds of miles of each other even? And a third thing also jumps in at the same time, which didn't come from any animal, but did come from a patent, which had been issued about 15 years previous to this event. And there's no evidence of it happening anywhere in nature. You don't see anything like 2 parts of this and not the third, or all 3 of them, in any creature in the wild. It only shows up in Wuhan. Now, what are we supposed to make of this? If we are punctuated equilibrists, we think that there wasn't enough time. If we're gradualists, we think it couldn't possibly have happened. It is just completely out of line. This is the thing that Stephen Gould will be accusing you of being a Christian for suggesting, which is about the dirtiest insult he can slap onto anyone. And I'm slipping out of the picture here. Not that matters. So what are we going to get? This is
when Don gets really into what he's saying. He eventually starts sliding out of his chair.
Yeah, and eventually I disappear altogether and just become pure thought, which is really scary. It's really hard to get me back. Okay. what are we supposed to believe? And the answer is, there were a lot of biologists that worked in laboratories and said, hey, I could have done that myself. This was a real simple edit together, and I can see the pangolin sequence. I can see the bat sequence. That's a real simple cut and paste, and I see no evidence at all of mutation in the thing. That is straight pangolin, that is straight bat. And of course, by now, both the pangolin and the bat have softened because of real mutations. It's been long enough, 2 years later, you can tell the difference. Back then, you couldn't tell the difference. The populations were small enough. There weren't huge numbers of these viruses infecting all the billions of pangolins and bats that live all over the world, like there are people that live all over.
So your point is intelligent intervention.
My point is we have a punctuation. There was a jump in the fossil record of DNA, and it was a bizarre jump. It was way bigger than anything Gould or Johansen had ever claimed. And it happened all at once, suddenly. And for some reason, there was a research lab that had a very poor safety record in the past of SARS virus leaking that appears to have been doing genetic mutation with federal funding from the United States. And they're claiming it wasn't gain of function, but what shows up is gain of function, covered by a U.S. patent, no less. So what are we supposed to conclude? Well, all of these biologists that said, hey, I could have done that myself in the lab were called conspiracists. And eventually they were shut down and censored for 2 years. And the reason they were censored is because they weren't going along with the status quo, the way it's supposed to be. The reason I am censored when I try to bring this up, when a possibility for debate comes up with an evolutionist, is because I am a Christian and they just don't let Christians speak because we're fools. Okay, the conspiracy theories were the accusations of anyone who tried to talk sense on the internet when this evidence first showed up. And people were saying that's pangolin DNA, and they said that's nonsense. And then 2 weeks later, people were saying, well, yes, it is pangolin DNA. And here's the theory for how it somehow leaked in. And anyone who said, but I could have done it myself in the laboratory was identified as a conspiracist. The fact was, if you get a patent, one of the requirements that I had to meet was you have to explain in the preferred embodiment section of the patent in enough detail that any person with ordinary skill in the art can understand and know how to do it themselves. So this patent gives enough information that anyone with ordinary skill in the art can stick in a furin cleavage sequence. And it shows where to put it in the DNA sequence, which is where it was put in. It shows patterns that should be used. It gave 3 possible patterns. The person who did it used the first one and claimed 2 instead of the ones in 3 and 4. And furthermore, when they did the sequence, CRR, it was in the DNA for making the RNA, not DNA, the RNA for coding for it. There are 6 different possibilities, 3 times 3, 4 times 16 different possibilities for coding for the R amino acid. And of them, one of the 16 combinations is the least common in bat RNA, which so it's not just 1 in 16, but it's way less possible than that the person would have done the same sequence twice in a row that did it, unless they were just typing the number in. And they picked the first one in the patent, and they typed the least common GCC. It would have been the first one alphabetically. No, ATGC. Yeah, it would have been the first of the 2 alphabetically, G's and C's. ATGC.
We get the point. You don't have to be exact. We're not scientists.
Okay.
We're not going to duplicate this.
No,
this
I need this to be right, Pete.
Yeah.
Hey, I just want to know, does Dennis Brown get a royalty on the coronavirus, or how does this work? He's got
I
the
think
patent.
Dennis is owed royalty on it. Dennis,
And that probably the vaccine, right? Because
well, obviously
caused the problem.
I think the point that you're making.
The point that I'm making is that this is a no-brainer. It's a slam dunk. It
Right.
was genetically engineered.
Right.
It was intelligent design. We can furthermore see the same thing echoed in all of evolution.
Right. Okay. So this is the question I have. So going back, like you were saying, the surrogate mother theory of punctuated equilibrium that God has injected, almost like a stimulus or a bolus, right, into different animals. That's your theory. My question is, why would he do that? What would the purpose be for doing that? And how does that fit in with the idea that God rested on the seventh day, that he was no longer creating?
Okay. According to Origen, we're still in the seventh day.
Ooh. So, okay.
When Jesus is breaking the Sabbath, he says, my Father works and I work still. Meaning that God breaks the Sabbath, even on the 1 out of 7 24-hour day schedule. But he can break his Sabbath anytime he wants to, because after all, the reason for the Sabbath was not to put a yoke on anyone. It was the Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath. We don't serve the Sabbath. The Sabbath is to serve us.
Interesting. Because Jesus was totally a Sabbath breaker. That's true.
That's correct. And so is God, as Jesus pointed out quite literally. Okay, let's see. Where were we? Are we done with this?
I didn't know
my
that could've been a
train's
mic
coming
drop.
though, so I was chewing on it, but my train was coming, as you can hear, so that's why I was muted.
Okay. Anyway,
Okay,
explain
so that's rad.
all the scientific evidence, all the biblical evidence.
Okay, so you believe. So let me just kind of back up, because this is why one of our listeners got excited that Pete asked a question. I did blink twice hard so that Pete would see, yes, this is where I knew you were going. So okay, so you do believe in a type of evolution. Going back to that, what would the
No
purpose?
random mutations, no survival of the fittest, and random mutations work within the species. When it's a new species, it's not either. No random mutations, no survival fittest. It's intelligent design.
So you believe that new species do appear, but it's not from random mutation. Do you believe that God will sometimes interject
engineered DNA and makes it similar enough to a previous species that it is not disastrous to the mother? A baby mouse does not give birth to an elephant.
Right.
In fact, you can't even do, I said earlier, started to say Rh factor changes in blood are enough to cause complications in humans.
So what I hear you saying, because the according to its kind is true even with your view, right? Like you're saying, an elephant does not give, if your theory is true, that actually does not violate, because each does give birth according to its kind.
Okay,
however,
that phrase has a technical glitch in it too, but it's maybe not the time to talk about it.
Okay, but that I'm only pointing that out, and I get that. If we were to really take that apart, we'd probably need you back for another episode.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: this is kind of what I'm saying. So what you're actually saying is, yes, there is, there's microevolution, obviously. I know you haven't really touched on that, but when it goes to macroevolution, that is divine intervention. And what you're actually saying is between Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Dawkins, neither one of them can prove their point, because they're both right and they're both wrong.
They will get in a bloody knockdown drag out to each other. Right.
Because the evidence seems to say contradicting things. And what you're saying is actually, in many ways, evolution, if you understand it, not the way the scientists teach it, but if you recognize it happens, and then you recognize the appearance of new species, you actually have to have God. So what you actually do when you talk to a scientist is you say, you actually can't believe in evolution without believing in God. That's what you're actually arguing.
Believe it, yes.
Wow.
That's how I present it.
I did not see that coming, Don Stoner. That is not something I have ever really thought about.
Not too many people see me coming at all. My mom was surprised.
I certainly didn't when you handed me your driver's license. All those years ago.
I sneak up on a lot of people.
So, Don, look, this has been fascinating. I know we are actually out of time.
This is one of the best podcasts we've ever done.
Absolutely.
It really is.
It
I
is.
hope your listeners like it.
Who cares about them? This is all about us.
When I feel challenged and stimulated to think on a deeper level, both about Scripture and the world that God made, and it's done by someone I trust and someone who loves the Word of God and loves God, and isn't afraid to question himself. Man, I got time for that. So this has been fascinating, Don. Again, Don is the author of A New Look at an Old Earth. He has written many other books. He has a blog. Don, where can people go and read some of your stuff outside your book?
Oh, I'm supposed to know that.
He doesn't know his own URL. That's the best.
It's great. Einstein didn't know his own phone number, but
I know. Right.
Hey, it has been good. I think we do want to have you back because you're definitely blowing my mind right here.
And we actually don't want to have to actually come up with our own topic. So
no, this is great. We just walk in, we let you talk really highfalutin things. We interject our Heckle and Jekyll routine, and it works. I almost feel like it's the three amigos,
Cool.
The smart one and the two stupid ones.
You shouldn't call Don stupid. You and Don aren't that stupid.
dstoner.net. Found it. I looked it up on the internet while you were through amigoing me.
I'm sorry. What did you say?
Dstoner as in Don Stoner. It's just one word. .net, because comment had already been taken. Right.
All right. One more time, Don.
dstoner. dstoner.net. That's how you get to it, or you search on Donald Wayne Stoner or something like that.
All right, dstoner.net. All right, that works. That's easy. Well, Pete, while you're doing all this pondering on micro and macro evolution, how do you have time to do your church bookkeeping and finances?
Well, I use some non-theistic intervention, and I reach out to Simplify Church. And I tell you, Josh Henry over there, he takes care of all those needs for me.
Is he like your church's surrogate mother?
He is my church's surrogate mother.
That's amazing. You know what? Pick up the phone today and tell him that you would like him to take from the rib of your church's finances and create something beautiful out of it. Go on over to simplifychurch.com today. You know what? You'll wake up and there'll just be a beautiful No, I'm just teasing. Don didn't like that.
A beautiful accounting done for you. I was going to riff
off the fact you did not wake up and find that next to you. But anyways, and while you're doing that, Pete, don't forget that there's also another service available called sermonboss.com. Want to know what they do?
Sermonboss.com? What is sermonboss.com?
Sermonboss.com, Pete. It's when you want to show videos and podcasts and audios and whatever else you got, but you don't want to take people away from your website. You just hook up with sermonboss.com. And that way they stay on your website while they do everything. That's really helpful for churches because once they leave you, they'll get lost down the dark hole of the internet, looking up Sumerians and all kinds of other things. And hey, you want them to stick with you. So especially if you got that Don Stoner guy on there, where he's going to get them thinking, looking up patents and all that. Wouldn't it be great if they could do it from your church's website? That's sermonboss.com.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, hey, you guys, thanks for joining us today. Our guest has been Don Stoner. This has been Peyton Jones and Pete Mitchell, and we have been talking things that are mind-blowing. Next week, we want Don to come back and talk quantum physics with us. How about that?
Woo!
How would you like quantum physics and the soul?
Quantum or quantum?
Geez. This is, yes. Yes,
okay.
Please.
All right. This is meant to be a 3-part series, so we may need to talk to Debbie and get special permission. Can Dawn come out and play? I actually sent an email with that written in there. Can Dawn come out and play with us today? So, and Debbie is rad. I'm glad that she got a rad shout out today. She's one of the best people we know. But thank you so much for coming on. Guys, thanks for listening. That we want to remind you, this has been the Church Planner Podcast, reminding you that if you want to reach ones nobody's reaching, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planner Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planner Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplannerpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planner Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplannermagazine.com.